So that's a video I took with my friends a while ago, but it actually took me an incredibly long time to stomach and eventually adopt this mindset that being fat didn't automatically make me ugly or unattractive. I come from a line of heavy-set women, and so I've never been naturally skinny. But I wasn't fat growing up. I just looked fat in comparison to the girls that I was surrounded by. Obviously, that led to many of my peers calling me fatty and other insults aimed at my perceived fatness. And for the longest time, I could not stand this. I would cry to my parents and I would hate my body. I'd get panic attacks because I was so scared that all I ever did was eat and get fat and eat and get fat and eat and get fat and then cry. In reality, I was an energetic kid. I played a bunch of sports. I ran around causing chaos. I would play with my friends every day after school. I wasn't fat then. I just had baby fat hanging off of me, as it would any fourth grader. So in reality, I wasn't just eating, getting fat, crying, and doing that all on repeat. But that didn't matter to me, because in my mind, there was no doubt that I was fat. I didn't look like any of the girls that I was surrounded by that were in my class at all. Fat, at any level or any amount, was always equal to disgust. And I had no idea that I could think differently. But then, 5 years ago, my sister sat me down and had a conversation with me about how I approached the word fat, the power it held over me and why. Until then, all the conversations I'd had with my family about how being fat wasn't a negative thing hadn't really stuck. I'd internally scoffed when she said that being fat didn't mean that I was ugly or terrible or unlovable. But what connected with me is that she hadn't approached it the way every other person had up until that point. She didn't talk about my fatness as though it was something that my worth could be recognized despite of. Instead, she acknowledged it, and then she abandoned it. She forced me to see myself outside of what I looked like. My interests, my passions, my knowledge, my talents, how I was so annoying to her. She was the first person who helped me see my fatness and me as two separate things, two separate entities that existed outside of each other. She taught me about beauty standards and why current society approaches fatness the way that it does. But that conversation didn't automatically solve all my issues with being fat. Over lockdown, I put on a lot more weight, right? And then boom, all the progress that I had made in not hating my body suddenly went down the drain. I think, personally, it's because at the time, I did put on a lot of weight and it became very, very evident that I was, as a matter of fact, now overweight. Lockdown meant that people went two ways in terms of their fitness and their health. They either became couch potatoes, like I did, or they turned to the fitness influencers on YouTube. I did not do that. I had a friend who, like me, went down the couch potato path. And like me, she hated her body. She struggled with waking up every morning to the fat that clung to her tummy, her thighs, her arms, and her cheeks. Being cooped up at home with a traditional Indian family who obviously commented on her weight didn't help either. And suddenly this urge to remove any of the hatred she felt for her body within herself overcame me. Because I couldn't stand that my friend was going through the same thing that I had been feeling for so long. And that's when the conversation with my sister came back to me. I didn't remember all of what she told me, but I just remembered the highlights. I knew, however, that if I wanted to have any impact on the way my friend thought about herself, I needed to learn, or rather relearn, the specifics of that conversation. So I decided to venture out onto the internet, and I learned, interestingly, that at many points in history, we actually considered fat to be attractive. Now, the New York Times has an article about the 400-year period fat was in fashion. Apparently, for a great long while, between 1500 and 1900, it was the ideal body type. And although there are contrasting accounts that talk about fat phobia in the Victorian era, one cannot deny that at some point in our recent history, it was popular to be fat. For example, the Baroque period celebrated a fat body, commemorating it in art as a hilly and lustrous landscape of flesh. Wow. Even further back in history, we find the Venus of Willendorf statues scattered among the soil of continental Europe and Central Asia. Malta, 5,000 years ago, held some sort of reverence for these statues of fat women. Guatemala, AD 700, the fat lord and the frog was carved in jade, indicating his importance to and reverence from this community, because not just anyone was carved in jade. But what made us hate fat? Why are we so opposed to the very thing our past civilizations spent so long worshipping? What happened in the past 100-odd years that made us loathe fat? Research suggests that it has a lot to do with the modern West, surprise, specifically the US, its internal beauty standards, and its dominance in globalization. The US followed a policy of isolationism in the 1900s, and within those decades, it developed its own set of internal beauty standards, ones that demonized fatness. The Body Positivity Alliance states that this was in large part linked to racism. White America now associated fatness with black people, and they believed them to be lazy and thus overweight. So now, this nation that is primed to become the world's biggest global superpower has nurtured a hatred for fatness. It wasn't influenced in any way by the other nations it was in relatively close proximity to, such as American Samoa, Paraguay, Argentina, and Mexico, all of whom were culturally fat positive. In the years during and after the Cold War, when America came into this identity of being the biggest global superpower, it brought with it the idea, the modern idea of globalization, one that involved the television, the radio, the internet. In 2011, Dr. Alexander Brewis from the Arizona State University conducted a very interesting anthropological study into the sudden global distaste for fatness. She found that this Western-dominated globalization and disgust for fatness gave way to the same aforementioned nations of American Samoa, Paraguay, Mexico, and Argentina having and adopting fat-phobic mindsets in the 1990s. From this, it isn't unrealistic to hypothesize that this same spread of a new ideology was now happening globally. But how exactly did this sudden wave of anti-fatness now manifest itself in the minds of our more recent generations? The most popular manifestation is in the global obsession with being fit. And this idea of fit is not an accurate representation of what the term actually means. Because MIT Medical says that physical fitness involves the performance of the heart and the lungs and the muscles of the body. What it doesn't mention is having a ripped body, having a 6 or an 8-pack, having toned calves and bulging biceps. However, it is the idea that holds very strong today in the minds of many, especially my generation. And I say this because it's the reality that I grew up with. Whether it's in how my peers interact with each other, or the Instagram comments I see under posts of people who aren't conventionally attractive or thin. There is now this global cultural belief that not having abs and other such things means that a person is fat and that they are unfit. But my counterclaim to this is rooted in the evidence of our world's top athletes. These are all some of the most dominant people in their respective sports. And none of them have what we think of as peak physical condition. By our own popular global cultural standards, this fatness shouldn't allow them to be serious competitors in a tournament as prestigious as the Olympics. Fatness inherently implies a lack of healthiness. But here they are. That's because it's what we're taught to internalize. The reality of it is that fatness becomes dangerous only when it tips into obesity, impacting the manner in which your body can function, stay fit, and stay healthy. It's the same with being skinny. Too skinny, and osteoporosis, malnutrition, and low immunity could kill you. Bodies come in different shapes and different sizes, and this diversity is not a bad thing, not until and unless a medical professional tells you otherwise. So all of this reading and researching and learning crafted a new mindset for me, one that allowed me to wear my fatness without any of the shame that usually made it an overbearing weight on my shoulders. It still took time to fully assimilate to and internalize, but nevertheless, it was a new era for me. One in which my body was no longer something I had to loathe and hate. The manner in which I responded to this new lifestyle was to now do everything in my power to rewire people's approach to the word fat. During this process of rewiring, the glaring realization that struck me was that we thoroughly tend to underestimate the power that language has on us and the impact it has on us. We all know it on some level, and yet somehow it's never something we truly internalize until we're on the other side of barbed and bladed words. Even so, I realized pretty early on that the power of the word is only as strong as your ability to leach the negativity out of it. We saw it with the word queer. It went from being a slur to something that the community now owns and uses proudly. The context for different is fat, yes, but the principle of reclamation remains the same. If we give words their power, we can just as easily take it back and decide how it affects us. Fat is placed on a hateful pedestal, propped up by systems that survive on anti-fatness and self-loathing. We think of fat as a ugly, unhealthy, bad thing. But there's so much more evidence that shows us how we didn't always believe that, and that being fat doesn't mean you're unfit. After that conversation with my sister, I've made it a point that whenever I'm talking about my body, I acknowledge that I am fat, not plump or chubby. It's quite amusing to see people jump up and tell me that I shouldn't say that I should be kind to myself, that I'm still beautiful, or I should use words like plump or chubby. But I use this as an opportunity to really sit with it, right? And tell them and strike up a conversation. And I start with the fact that I never implied that I wasn't beautiful, or that I was ugly, or that I hated myself. I think that trying to refer to people who are fat with using terms that sort of beautify the word, like chubby or plump, is actually detrimental to the body positivity movement. Because what we're doing is we're making fat something digestible for our current appetites for beauty. When people try to use every other term for the word except the word itself, it perpetuates the idea that fatness is unappealing and inherently inferior. Instead of tackling the biases that create these negative connotations in our minds, we brush them under a carpet that disguises this action as sensitivity. The power of the word lies in our ability to strip the negative connotations from it. When I say fat, I understand that I'm coming from a neutral and sometimes even positive perspective. The one thing that stuck with me, even after all of these years, from that conversation with my sister, was the quote, "Fat is not an insult, it's an adjective." From all the information that I have given you today, that is the one thing I would hope you take away. It is a word that is not inherently negative. It's a word that describes something, that describes being something, without the weight of our own added connotations. Thank you.